So continuing on, we're talking about individuals in the ecosystem. So at the level of the individual, ecologists often focus on learning about the abiotic environment effects and how it affects its behavior and physical features. So adaptations. So an example of this is surface-dwelling fish in the Antarctic Ocean possess a number of unique adaptations which allow them to thrive in the cold water. So one word here that we might not know what this means is adaptations. And adaptations, if I want to use, and without using the word adapt, but I think you guys know what adapt means. It means to sort of change to your environment. So this fish might change its body, it might change its physiology inside of it so that it can live in cold water. So what might it do? Maybe it has thicker skin to keep it warm, maybe it has better metabolism, like the blood flow inside of their body, something like that. So different things they would adapt over time so that they can live in certain environments. As far as populations, this population ecologists focus on how a group of individuals of the same species change in size and distribution over time. Populations may be impacted by competition for resources and changes in the environment. So if we look at the polar bear as an example, polar bears, they would compete against other polar bears for resources. These resources could be food, they could be mates, and maybe habitat as well. So maybe the polar bear needs to compete against other polar bears for the best fish. Maybe there's the best mate, so they need to compete against each other to see which mate the female is going to choose, or habitat as well. And we know that polar bear habitat is decreasing, so maybe they need to compete against others, like who's going to be able to live here? Well, the strongest one, hopefully. And then changes in their environment. So this is a huge thing. So we know that the habitat is changing for polar bears. So what could change? The access to food, depending on the environment. We could have droughts or fires that could destroy habitat. And how do they adapt to that? So many different things in their environment, like temperature as well, that they're either going to have to move, they're going to have to adapt, or they're going to die, basically. So those are the options when we're looking at a population, and a lot of populations will be decimated basically by one of these factors. Maybe there's not enough food. Well, only some of them are going to eat and live, and the others are going to die. Maybe there's a drought or a fire that destroys a habitat. Well, you're either going to move, you're going to somehow live in that different conditions, or you're going to die. And the temperature as well. As far as communities, it says in nature, populations are rarely isolated. Community ecologists study the interactions among members of different populations. Competition between species, like a predator-prey relationship, and the resource availability all impact community dynamics. What factors might influence the structure of each community above? So if we're looking at each of these communities, it's asking us what kind of interactions might influence the structure of each of these communities. So if we look in the forest community, there would be a lot of space there. There would be a lot of places where species could live. So that might not be quite as much competition. Just because certain species could live at the top of the tree, some could live in the middle of the tree, some could live on the ground. There's lots of different spaces that things could take up, so they might not have to compete for space. They might have to compete for resources, so depending on what resources they're looking for, but also the predator-prey relationship. There's a lot of places to hide in this ecosystem, so a much, I guess, easier place for a community to thrive because there's lots of space and then there's lots of places. Where the one on the right-hand side, not a lot of things for stuff to eat, unless you're living on grass. That's basically all that's there. So the resources could be, if there's only one plant, then imagine a disease coming through that kills grass. Well, your ecosystem or your community is decimated. Your predator-prey relationship, there's not a lot of places to hide here, so thinking about that. And then the competition for resources, well, there's a lot of one thing, but if you're looking at maybe something's living on grasshoppers, well, is there going to be enough for that? And then that takes into account the resource availability. Then if we go to the top of this hierarchy, we've got ecosystems. So an ecosystem ecologist studies how all of the biotic and abiotic factors in a given area interact to shape an ecosystem. Key abiotic factors include soil quality, water availability, temperature, and access to sunlight. So it's really important to note these things, I guess. So whatever, if we look at all of these different factors in an ecosystem, that can determine sort of what can live there. So soil quality, that's going to affect what kind of plants can live there. Water availability, that's going to depend on what things can actually grow there, right? We need water for plants to grow. And remember back to the last section, we know that all energy enters the ecosystem from those producers. So the producers in the ecosystem depend on the soil quality and the water availability. Without those things, or if they're not good or not in ideal conditions, then everything else is going to sort of fall from that, because we need that initial energy in the ecosystem. And that takes into account sunlight and temperature as well. Sunlight, we know, is where the ecosystem's energy comes from, and then the temperature is going to depend on what can actually grow there. So all those 4 factors are huge abiotic factors, so they're not living things, but they do affect the living things. So abiotic is totally connected to how biotic things live. So the moral of the story, it says, within the biosphere, everything impacts everything else. So we need all of these things together. We can't just take out one thing, and we can't just isolate something and be like, how is this affected? Everything's connected. It's a big web of interconnectedness. So everything impacts everything. And that's sort of how life goes. It's not as simple as those, webs that we are sort of, not webs, but food chains that we originally made, because we know in real life that there's lots of other factors that affect sort of those relationships. All right. So that is that section right there. So we're going to continue on talking about ecosystem diversity. It says in terrestrial ecosystems, and terrestrial means land, so on the land, precipitation and temperature are the main predictors of diversity. So precipitation is rain or water of some sort. So how much rain you have, and then your temperature. Okay, so depending on how much rain you get and what the temperature is, that's going to affect what can actually live there. And if we look at this picture, it shows the different types of ecosystems that exist on Earth. And you've probably heard of some of these before. We've got deserts. There's semi-deserts and hot deserts, so a bunch of different deserts. We've got the savanna. We've got tropical rainforest, temperate rainforest, temperate deciduous forest, temperate grassland, taiga, and tundra. Okay, so those are all of the different ecosystems that exist on Earth, and why they're different is because they have different amounts of rain and they have different temperatures. And on this graph, you can sort of see what the different rain and temperature are. So you guys know what a desert is, I'm going to guess. If we look at a hot desert, which is right here, the average temperature is on the left-hand side, so 25 degrees Celsius. And then the average precipitation, so in centimeters of rain, is on the bottom, the x-axis. So if we look at where the desert is, it's pretty hot, right? 25 degrees. And if we go down here, not a whole lot of rain, okay? So that sort of shows on the graph where that fits. If we look at the tropical rainforest, you know what a rainforest is, or you've heard of it before. In a rainforest, we've got quite a lot of rain. It's called a rainforest for a reason. So a rainforest there. And then we've got a whole lot of sun, or temperature, I guess. So 25 degrees on average, but a lot of rain. So that's the difference between a rainforest and a desert, is the amount of rain. It's still exactly the same temperature. When we look at the tundra down here, that would be like north of us, sort of like in the Northwest Territories area. They get like basically no rain, and it's really cold. So think of it, tundra as sort of like a cold desert. Not a lot grows there because there's not a lot of rain, and also not a lot of heat. All right, so that's just sort of the different ecosystems that exist. It says, which biome do you expect to have the most diversity and the least? So I don't know, we never said that these are biomes, but they are. So biome is sort of like a subsection of our ecosystems, or another word for an ecosystem. And within those, diversity, the word diversity means sort of different species. Okay, so the different species that exist within a biome means diversity. So the more different species that exist, the more diverse it is. So if we look at all of these biomes, which one do you think has the most diversity? So the most amount of plants and animals? Well, I can't ask you that, but I'm going to tell you that it's going to be the tropical rainforest. So the rainforest, because it's the hottest, but it also has the most rain. There's going to be a lot more stuff growing there, right? Heat and water creates plants, and plants puts energy into the ecosystem. So when we think about it, this stuff should be the most diverse up in this corner. And this should be the least diverse because there's not a lot of water, not a lot of sun, so that diversity is not going to be very high. So most diverse would be the tropical rainforest, and least diverse would be the tundra. Okay, so something to note here, diversity is totally affected on rain and I'm going to say heat, the temperature, okay? So here's an example of a tropical rainforest. Beautiful. Wish I was there right now. And this is an example of a tundra. So these are the ones that we just said. So tropical rainforest, the most diverse, tundra, the least. And you can tell by just looking at it, like, imagine how much is actually living in here, like in that rainforest. There's going to be tons of things living there. There's going to be, as far as plants, animals, insects, all that stuff. Compared to the tundra, not a whole lot going on there. Mosses growing on the ground. There's not even enough sun or rain to be able to grow sort of trees. So just like looking at how tall even the plants are in an area is going to show how diverse it is. So our patterns in ecosystem diversity, well, as a result, diversity is positively correlated with the proximity to the equator. The equator is sort of like the center of the globe, and this oops. Wow. So if you look at that middle line here, I don't know why it's not letting me, but that equator sort of cuts the Earth in half. And everything along that equator is going to be probably the most diverse areas in the world. And if we look at it, lime green is our tropical rainforest. There's a whole lot of tropical rainforest along that equator line. And then everything else as we go out is going to sort of be less diverse. So what they're saying is the closer it is to the equator, sort of the more diverse the species are that live in that area. And this is like the Amazon rainforest. We've got a bunch of rainforest here in Southeast Asia, right along this equator line in Africa. This is Madagascar. See where we've got all of this rainforestish. It's all within that band along the equator. Okay. Is there any exceptions to this generalization? So if we're looking for tundra's the light blue, it's all up here. Maybe as we looking at deserts are always are around the equator as well, which is sort of like the opposite of a rainforest because it's not getting that rain. It's sort of a exception, I guess, to that generalization. I don't really see anywhere else on the earth that has rainforests that aren't along the equator. Yeah, I don't know if there's really any exceptions to that rule. It looks pretty good. I guess they're saying that the deserts are, and that's what I was saying as well. The deserts are exceptions to the rule because they're close to the equator. They have high temperature but low rain, which means low diversity. So just around there in Africa, we've got some deserts along the equator, and that would be, that exception to the rule where there's not a lot of diversity in a desert. And that's all because of the rain. Okay. All right. If we look at aquatic ecosystems, so this is not terrestrial, this is in the water. Within aquatic ecosystems, diversity may be predicted by vertical stratification. This is the deeper you go, the less diversity you generally find. And the reason why we say this is because of how far things are from the light. Basically, we know that light equals energy, because we need light to do photosynthesis. So the farther you are from the light, I'm going to say the sun. The sun equals less diverse. Okay. So we've got different zones within the ocean. The very top zone would be called the littoral zone, which is shallow, but it has lots of light. There's plants that are rooted and also floating, and they flourish because they have photosynthesis from the light. The next, zone down is the limnetic zone. And this is also well lit. It's in open water. Lots of phytoplankton live here, and their phytoplankton use photosynthesis, so they're still getting a bunch of light. If we go even farther down, we've got the profundal zone, which is deeper water with little light. Not as much oxygen available down here because there's not really photosynthesis, just because it's not getting the amount of light it needs. This is occupied by bottom dwellers. So bottom dwellers, they adapt basically to cooler, darker waters. And then the very lowest part of our ocean is the benthic zone. This is really the bottom of the lake. And this is occupied by things that are able to live in low oxygen levels. Okay, so within our ecosystem, we have lots of different levels, and within our aquatic system, we have even levels or zones of basically how far you are from the light. And if we look at these zones, these sort of bands, we can actually sort of see different species living in them. And it's, if you ever get the chance to actually do something like this, like I went scuba diving before, it was like the best and worst moment of my life because I damaged my ears, but also if you do it properly, you will have an amazing time because you get to see sort of like where certain species live, and as you go farther down, you tend to see sort of different bands of fish. And I mean, we can't go super far down, but I could at least go between like the littoral zone to the limnetic zone. I didn't go obviously to the bottom unless I was in a more shallow area. I guess I did touch the bottom, but it wasn't like the bottom of the ocean. I was just sort of in a shallow area off the coast. But super amazing to be able to see these things, you know, in their natural habitat. So I'd highly recommend if you can ever explore the ocean, because the ocean we know not a whole lot about. There's so much unexplored areas in the ocean that it's just magnificent to be able to see it. And yeah, I would have seen something like this when I was down there, sort of on a coral reef. Anyway, limiting factors. So water, temperature, sunlight, and oxygen are all examples of abiotic factors that sort of limit the size and distributions of populations. What might be some biotic limiting factors? So those are abiotic, those are non-living things that limit our ecosystems, but biotic are, what are some living things? So the answer to that would be food, obviously. Food is going to be alive, so it's going to either be a plant or an animal, so that's going to limit it. Also, predators, which I guess is connected to food. And I never thought of that other one, which is parasites or diseases. And competition. So the different things that will limit an ecosystem is competition for food, shelter, mates. So you have to compete against other things in your species or against other species. Predators, so you get eaten by a fox, that's going to be totally limiting your population. And then parasites or some sort of disease as well. We think of those as they are living things. So bacteria, fungus, viruses, all of those things are definitely things that can limit our population. And we even are seeing that right now where we are limiting, you know, our population is decreasing. We're seeing people die every day from COVID, for instance, and that's something that would be a biotic limiting factor in our human population. Okay. So that is that section. I'm just going to stop there for now because this moves on to some classification and taxonomy. All right. I think that this is still topic 1. Yes, still topic 1, but I'm going to do this in a separate video, and then you will have everything you need for topic 1 assignments. All right.